Hello and welcome to our Lakeside chat. We are David Wofford and Katie Noonan, co-chairs of the Rotary Nature Center Friends. And we're so happy that you can join us tonight.
As we begin our program, it is important for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, that Lake Merritt is part of Ohlone territory. We hear now from Corinna Gould, spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of LaShawn and co-founder of Segura Te Land Trust.
Good afternoon, relatives. My name is Corinna Gould. I am the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of LaShawn. We are here today at what most folks think of as Lake Merritt. We are in the territory of Huichin. Huichin is actually a territory that encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so this is a place that my ancestors have been since the beginning of time. And this was a place of abundance. I'm so happy that people from all walks of life that now come into our territory can enjoy this beautiful place that my ancestors have enjoyed since the beginning of time. My relationship to the land that I have been born to, raising my children and grandchildren here, has been to tell the story, the truth of what happened on this land before other people came here. I'm hoping that as we begin to learn these lessons of fires in California, the pandemic that's happening, that human beings come back to living in reciprocity with the earth.
Thank you, Corinna. That is an inspiring message for us all today, and may it come to happen in the future. At this point, I have a few announcements I'd like to make, and then we'll begin our program. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of our Rotary Nature Center Friends supporters that have contributed so much to our ability to provide programs both online and in person to the community around Lake Merritt. In particular, the New Voices Are Rising organization with the Rose Foundation, Save the Bay, Youth Employment Partnership and Team Oakland, the Achieve program, and the Alameda County Clean Water program and the Lake Merritt Breakfast Club have been very generous in helping us to continue our programs. And we have other, I want to recognize everyone who has contributed both in funding and also in kind to our work. We want to make an announcement to everybody who's here tonight that we are starting a California Naturalist course to be offered from October 4th through January 14th. So this is a substantial course that's going to hopefully educate a group of people who are knowledgeable about Lake Merritt and its surrounding natural history, both in San Francisco Bay and in the wider state, and be able to participate in interpretive activities and deliver them at Lake Merritt. So our instructor for this program is going to be Stephen Cochran. Stephen, are you with us tonight?
Hello.
Yes, so could you tell us a little bit about this course and why it's an exciting thing to be doing?
Sure. This is one of several of the California Naturalist Environmental Steward courses that are sponsored by the University of California, Agriculture and Natural Resources. Katie will have some links to to our course that I'm working with Katie on, and you can also look at the statewide listing of courses. Typically, the courses are 40 hours, including lecture and field trip, and we're very excited to be able to offer a coastal estuary Lake Merritt course and focus on some of the marine biology and the adjacent upland plants and animals that make up the Lake Merritt area.
Thank you. I'm going to put a link into chat about how you can go to the Eventbrite, and that gives information as well as an opportunity to sign up or make the initial sign up, and then after that there will be more. But anyway, I will do that as soon as I stop sharing my screen. So as we move on, I'd like to again remind everyone that Rotary Nature Center Friends is an independent, all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit since 2021. And we engage the community in real science and stewardship activities, bringing nature and people together in the heart of downtown Oakland. The focus of our activities are community science and environmental justice. And we have had a very wonderful, active season, and we're looking forward to continuing in the coming year with our California Naturalist course and working with all of the wonderful groups of young people and community members to enjoy and learn about our lake. So thank you so much, Stephen. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful speaker for the evening, Dr. Amy Bohorquez from Laney College. So Amy is a biologist and an educator living and working in Oakland. I've known Amy for at least 2 decades. I was a teacher at Oakland High School, and my students went to Laney and really enjoyed her classes, came back enthused and excited. She's been part of the faculty there for more than 20 years. As a queer person of mixed ethnicity, Amy's research focuses on ensuring student well-being, and their well-being is prioritized when covering topics that may elicit emotional responses, including climate change, systemic medical scientific oppression, and encouraging self-reflection for all community members and re-examining the material taught in science programs. So it's back to school, and this is thank you, Amy, so much for bringing us your knowledge and sharing your talk with us tonight. So did I leave anything out that you'd like to add for your introduction?
Oh, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you all are doing as well. And just thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting to be here. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so as Katie said, I'm Amy Bohorquez. I'm biology faculty at Laney College, so just on the corner of the lake there. I am also a former community college student myself. So, and like she said, I am a biologist. So this research is fairly, kind of close to my heart here. But let me just move to the
Amy,
next. Yeah.
I forgot to mention before you get started that Amy has is going to be giving a presentation, but if you have a question, please type it into the chat. If it's something that is, we can ask her to answer it right away if it's something that's like very specific to a slide or something. And then she will also have a question and answer period at the end. Please don't talk during her presentation. You should be muted. And if you would have a question and you'd like to ask something, we can then ask you to unmute at that point. So this sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for letting me butt in this time.
Oh, yeah, no, that's good. Always good. All right.
Yeah, okay. Thanks so much.
Sure, no problem. Yes, yeah, and I tend to, like Kay said, I may not look at the chat, but if it's something particularly important, and just also I do have all the references if anybody needs them, if that comes up. But partially one of my research kind of focused on is I've taught at Laney College for over 20 years now, and every semester teaching general biology and non-majors biology, and we talk about climate change, and it's just so stressful, right? And it can be very demoralizing and challenging. So I wanted to kind of look at different ways that I could do a better job of supporting student well-being while talking about these rather difficult topics. And so that's where my kind of research comes in. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on students and stress in particular. There's a lot of research on climate change and mental health, but I'm just going to focus on two things to start with, just because this is like a whole field in and of itself, which is a really important field to be studying. But a lot of it, when we start looking at climate change and mental health, what we're really talking about is kind of mourning the loss of what we have as a home, right? And this is what Albrecht has kind of coined this term soul nostalgia. So kind of like nostalgia, homesickness when you are still in the same place, right? So that loss of a home environment. That's also really important when we talk about climate change and mental health, that we differentiate between different pathways that this can take. And Susan Clayton has done a lot of research looking at differences in the impact of mental health, climate change and mental health, whether we're talking about discrete events like natural disasters or extreme weather, that, you know, somebody's house burns down or the neighborhood, or I have friends in Altadena who lost everything, right? Or direct affect things like, for instance, changing temperature that make it no longer hospitable to live places, or indirect things like increases in pollution, right? That make it, or that make it more difficult to move around and things, or the perception of these impacts, which is something that Susan Clayton refers to as climate anxiety. And it's not that any of these are better or worse than the other. It's just these things can be different. And that's kind of important to discuss, because when we look at college, and as Katie mentioned, I teach at Laney College. I live here in Oakland, right? There will be a disproportionate impact of climate change on different neighborhoods of Oakland. Specifically, many of the students who come to Laney College, right, will be disproportionately impacted. So, and some people have come to Laney from other places because they have been, displaced by climate change, right? So keeping these things in mind as educators who talk about climate change, it's also important to kind of discuss. Now, as mentioned, I teach college, right? So looking at college students and stress is also a really important thing to consider. Before COVID, there was already high rates of reporting of anxiety. And this first study mentioned here from 2019 was actually done in multiple countries, so 14,000 students, and the majority of US students talked about having anxiety. Then during COVID and after, there was a lot of research kind of tracking mental health of college students and adolescents, right? And so some of these studies were done on high school kids during COVID, meaning they are in college now or are in graduate school now, right? Like, it's hard to imagine that was 5 years ago, because it doesn't seem like it some days and sometimes it does, right? Right. So looking at the impact of COVID on student mental health, particularly reportings of things like harassment or things like feelings of aloneness, right, or increases in demand for services at community college or at colleges in general. And I can say, as someone who teaches college, there's a lot more free discussion of mental health benefits and resources on campus. Sorry, my cat just walked past me and changed the slide, right? So than there was before, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, it's good we're all talking about this more. And one of the big impacts that came out of this research was that there was an increase in what's referred to as adverse childhood experiences during COVID. And 1/3 of adolescents experienced a new traumatic event in that academic year of 2020 to 2021. This is really important. In California, our former Surgeon General, Nadine Burke-Harris, is a big supporter of looking at adverse childhood experiences and looking at what's called the ACEs test, which is a list of 10 questions that have to do with your upbringing and different potentials for traumatic events. So she was a pediatrician in the Bayview that then started to implement this. And as the Surgeon General of California, she started statewide programs looking at the effect of your ACEs score on overall health, right? And we know that there's patterns regardless of which ones you're saying are true, right? They're yes, no kinds of questions. If you are interested in taking it, I just would recommend, making sure you're in a good place when you do it, because it can be more challenging for some of us. And one of the things that we get from this, though, is we understand that there's implications of ACEs scores on health, but we also know that ACEs scores can relate to stress and learning challenges, right? We know that stress does reduce the activity of your amygdala, like in your brain, which is kind of your fear center. So we know that this makes it more difficult for students to focus on and sit still for long periods of time. It's hard to recall things when there's stress and increases in cortisol. There's also been a number of studies, particularly, like I said, during and post-COVID, looking at depression and decreases in academic performance. And students who suffer from depression are twice as likely to drop out of college. Right, so I'll just say that again. So students who suffer from depression are twice as likely to drop out. And we see this in a couple of different reports. We also look before college, looking at students who are LGBTQ plus, and particularly students of color who are also identify as LGBTQ plus. We can see that there is, and I'll just highlight the bottom left corner here, the college completion rates, right? There is increases in students who drop out, right, who don't complete college, who identify with both of these. Many of them have also experienced different levels of harassment, and in middle school and high school also may have had increases in disciplinary actions and things. Right. So what does this mean? So when we're looking at students and student accessibility services, or what was previously referred to as as DSPS, or Disabled Student Services, now we refer to it as Student Accessibility Services. What you can see here is in 2004, about 11% of students identified as having disabilities and had some kind of accommodations for college. However, in 2020, there was a jump to 21%. And these data are from the Government Accountability Office, which I will say is still an office. So thank you very much. Hopefully still, I have friends that work there, whereas much of that research from the CDC on mental health during COVID is really hard to find now. So it's there, it's just a challenge to find it on their website. But what you can see, again, looking kind of comparatively from 2004 to 2020, is increases also in students with ADD and ADHD, or mental and emotional stress, or depression, right? These numbers have gone up kind of drastically, or we have better reporting, right? And it's probably a bit of a combination of both. But what this research really looked at was these students are, again, less likely to graduate. They often also did not ask for accommodations, or were not, oh, excuse me, that's my slides, were not granted accommodations from faculty, even though it is the law. And we can talk a little bit about that language if you want, about where the ambiguity might lie, right? And when students did not get accommodations, then they kind of stopped asking. So there was a lot of discussion about self-advocacy and kind of agency of students, right? So if we had this already, right? So students already have stress, and then we look at climate change education stress. And in most of the research, and I say that because I'll tell you about mine in a moment, most of the research, what we found is that there is an increase in stress when talking about climate change. Now, even though most climate change curriculum just focuses on geophysical things and doesn't talk sociopolitical or socio-emotional things, to some degree, that lack of us addressing those things kind of means that it's like an elephant in the room kind of thing. And sometimes students don't know if they can talk about it. Often faculty don't know how to talk about it. I can say, as a biologist, like no one taught me how to talk about my feelings in general, much less about climate change, right? But we do see increases in stress. We do see students feeling like the doomsday thing doesn't work, but the oh, it's all going to be okay also doesn't work, right? We need to just be kind of realistic about what's going on and talk about what potential solutions. There's also a lot of stress on the faculty side because they don't always know, like I said, how. So when we look at climate change so when we're looking at STEM education in particular, which is where a lot of these classes or these topics come up, it's also important to acknowledge that there is what Susan Berryman referred to as an educational pipeline, and that there are leaks in the pipeline, right? And we've talked about, there's a lot of research looking at a leaky pipeline, particularly in STEM or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programs. And the National Science Foundation has previously put out a report every couple of years since Sue Berryman's first report in 1983, looking at the numbers, demographic numbers of women, and this is the language of the report, is underrepresented minorities and people with disabilities moving through this pipeline, right? So how many individuals are there nationwide looking at the census, and then how many individuals are there that actually are getting associate's degrees versus bachelor's degrees versus master's degrees, right? And then from there, doctorates and the workforce. So you can see even just looking at women, right? 51% of the population, but only 35% of the workforce and only 41% of doctoral students. And I will also say it is disproportionate in terms of how many people, women who identify as women, are in the natural sciences versus the physical sciences versus math, right? So we're just saying STEM, but it's a pretty big window. So we know though these reports, right, are giving us information on who's moving through this pipeline and why. And a lot of that research points to this idea of a sense of belonging in STEM. So when people don't necessarily feel like they belong in a STEM course, right, it makes it very challenging to stay. We have a lot of weed out or gatekeeping classes, right? A lot of us biologists talk about organic chemistry, like, oh, organic chemistry, right? So we all know too that STEM students tend to have a lower GPA, which for a lot of students who are raised with a lot of perfectionism, that can be really challenging, right? So it's really difficult to not be the top student all the time, to not get perfect scores on things, or what's referred to sometimes as a STEM grading penalty. We also know that there is a bit of a lack of science identity, or a feeling that, yes, I really like science, but I don't know if I belong here. And sometimes the way we present science education doesn't always kind of encompass those feelings or help people feel like they actually do belong in the fields, right? So ensuring that we have a diverse kind of examples of different scientists in the field and different perspectives, right? That's one thing that is really important when we look at STEM belonging. So I wanted to look at this. I thought, okay, so as, like I said, a former community college student myself, a queer person with mixed ethnicity who didn't always feel welcome in science, how does adding teaching climate change add to feelings of welcomeness or unwelcomeness in the classroom, right? And we've seen this in other research where we're looking at biology in particular, looking at how you feel about the class is a larger indication of your ability to move to the next level. This was a study done at Columbia University and introductory level biology students, and then was replicated and has pretty much been holding true. So since I work at a college, I thought I'm just going to ask, right? So I could hypothesize or I can ask. So I went out and recruited students to take a survey, asking them about how they felt about learning about climate change. And then again, we started talking about medical and scientific oppression and bias and things like that too. I also asked them, if they had any kind of mechanism for support related to religious or spiritual practices. So this was a very self-selecting group. I did say this is what I'm going to be asking about. Like, it was completely voluntary, completely anonymous. And then from there went on to interviews. Now, as mentioned, and most of you know where Laney College is, right? We are part of the Peralta Community College District. We have about 16,000 students during the period of time that I did my research. Most of those students are part-time. Most of them do our traditional age range, meaning that they're, like 18 to 25 or so, with the majority being under 35. Then we do have our population at Laney does kind of reflect Oakland in a lot of ways too, which you can see. So I did get a pretty diverse group of answers. But what was interesting, right, was that of the 70 or so people who took the survey, which so I talked about 600 people, 10% of them took the survey or so, only 35 of those said they had even been introduced to that material, regardless of the faculty who taught those classes saying, oh yeah, we talk about this all the time. So that was an interesting thing and not what I expected to find, and also made it a little bit more of a challenge. And of those individuals, about 16% left their contact information saying they would be okay to be interviewed, most of whom I did also reach out to some former students who took classes with me, right, or were TAs with me, things like that. A lot of them knew me fairly well. But here's where it got interesting, because of the individuals who said that they had experienced climate change education and had learned about these things, right? Then a number of them said it doesn't affect me. Now, in my research, I used the context of students of non-dominant cultures, NDC, or lower socioeconomic status, as opposed to underrepresented minorities like we saw earlier. So it's kind of a larger umbrella. So I didn't break it into different subcategories of how folks identified, but I was really fascinated that people were reporting that they didn't necessarily feel like they had any kind of stress associated with these topics. So that was a surprise and made me re-examine a whole lot of things, right? So I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I started interviewing people. And of the interview people, 16, like I said, gave me their email. About 10 said they wanted to be okay with being interviewed, right? And I closed captioned and things. And this is the more just for the record. And these were the themes. Now, I know I am asking you to read all of these because this is very like wordy and there's lots of information here. So I'm just kind of going to summarize for you. Because I thought, okay, this must mean if there are folks who are saying it that learning about climate change doesn't affect their stress, and other statistics say that it should, like, I don't know, is it a bad thing if it doesn't, or did I just do my survey wrong? Because one of the main things that I found in these interviews were people that I talked to would be like, well, I said it doesn't really impact my mental health well-being, but that wasn't really true, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So what you're telling me, it is actually then, like, yeah. So you can see this first part, that the survey participants did not want to share how stressful the material might be. Participants might be overwhelmed and therefore have high stress levels already. So many of them were like, yeah, I can't admit that that's true, right? It would be really hard to admit that that's true. It would be really hard for me to say, like, you know what, I already don't feel welcome, and learning about climate change is increasing my stress in a way that makes me feel even more welcome. And I talked to a number of individuals who also already had degrees and things and had gone through graduate school that I know pretty well. And they were like, yeah, it would have stopped me from moving on if I had really let that sink in. So I thought, okay, there must be some bias then in the way that I did my research, which could be true. There's question order bias. Maybe I asked things in the wrong order. I asked demographic information in the beginning, which I know better because I know stereotype threat studies indicate that when people are asked demographic data, they don't tend to express all the knowledge that they have when you feel like you're identifying for your whole group. There's also social desirability bias, that people tend to answer in ways that make themselves feel better or make their communities look better, you could say, right? Or makes them think it's not as bad. And of course, there's observer bias, right? I didn't want to push anybody into taking this survey. So that means it could be that I ended up kind of self-selecting too and said, like, don't take this, it'll be stressful, right? So then I started thinking, and the more interviews and followed up with some of the interview participants, and realize, well, is it social desirability bias? Is it just people saying, this doesn't bother me as much as I thought? Or is it a type of imposter syndrome, which many of us in sciences feel all the time, right? Like this idea that someone will find out that I don't really belong here. Or is it kind of a combination of the two, or what my dissertation chair was like, kind of like a facade maintenance? I was like, yeah. And then I brought that back to some of the people I interviewed and some of the people I work with. Like, how much do you feel like a bit of facade maintenance? Like, you need to convince yourself that you belong there, right? And you're going to keep up this facade to kind of prevent it from getting to your like kind of inner core self. So then the question is, what do we do with this, right? So what are some of the implications, right? And I will say that of the interview, the studies that I conducted and the interviews I did, a lot of the students I talked to said, or the participants, I should say, some of them aren't students anymore. A lot of them talked about how much they appreciated at community college that people care, and that we got to know them as faculty, and that we asked them how they were doing, and that it wasn't just a lecture of 700 people, right? Things, which is what they experienced when they transferred or got on to graduate school, right? A number of them talked about how the higher in education they went, the less they felt like people cared about them, which is unfortunate for sure, and also makes me like, okay, well, we're doing the right thing then at least at Laney College and in community college. They also appreciated that we presented stuff about diversity in STEM, and we talked about things that were more relatable to our community, like talking about Lake Merritt. Like, we talk a lot about Lake Merritt and the history of Lake Merritt, and we talk a lot about the Confederated Villages of Lijon, and we talk a lot, like we try to bring in, even talking about the disproportionate impact of climate change. Students felt like at least we acknowledged that that was true, right? That was a thing. So those were things, ensuring students care about you and relatable information seem like very tangible things that we can do. They also, particularly students who transferred or in doctoral programs or finished with their graduate programs now, talked to me about how much they loved going outside. So sometimes Katie will come and we'll come do some water testing and things, and we go look at Lake Merritt, we look at birds. Sometimes I would just stop lab if it seemed like a very stressful day, and we would just go walk around outside for about 10 minutes. Like, let's just go outside. Like, let's just, everyone put stuff down. We're just going to wander around outside for a few minutes. And they said that that was really important, just getting outside of the hierarchy of the room. And what was interesting that some of them noted was that when you come into class, people sit where they're going to sit, even if you make them move around, right? Eventually, everybody just talks to their friends. But outside, everyone was kind of more of an equal. It wasn't who's in the front of the class and who's in the back of the class. It wasn't me standing up and talking. It wasn't, people had access around the campus, which they really appreciated. So those were things, right, as well as kind of looking at community support. So faculty support absolutely seems a key, but also ensuring you're creating a community in the room. So a lot of the students, the participants, also talked about how they're still in touch with people they had class with, right? And even if they went off and transferred to different schools, they had a community or a network of support that they felt like they could kind of come back. And many of them actually have come back this summer from the people that I interviewed, just to stop by and say hi, which has been really great. And want a big hug. I always ask first, is it okay for a hug? Or I said they say yes, right? Or if not, I wouldn't. But that kind of feeling that they have somewhere to come back to. I also really want to emphasize the stuff about accommodations. And like I mentioned, accommodations are the law, that's true. But what the law says is reasonable accommodations. And the number of faculty, even that I know, that think, oh, well, that's just not reasonable. Like, it's not reasonable for you not to be able to take a timed practical because you're going to have to later. Maybe, but there have to be ways that we can ensure to build kind of strength and support for those students. I did have a former student, talk to me about in her doctoral program, feeling like there wasn't really an SAS office for her to take exams. And she had some medical conditions where she needed to take her exams in another room and the teacher would forget, right? And it made it that she was always behind. So even if we know that may happen in the future, teaching skills on how to handle that kind of thing or supporting students' personal agency is a really big aspect, right, of ensuring when they transfer, they're successful. On the other side, using tools like what's referred to as universal design for learning, which is kind of an educational model that has a little more like flexible deadlines. You're kind of building in accommodations to all assignments so that it's not that some students get accommodations and some don't, is that you have all these kind of different ways of doing stuff, which is kind of fun in science classes, I will say too, especially, this report could be a report, this one's a poster, this one make a short, video, especially because I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people have phones and know how to do cool editing on their phones that I don't know how to do, right? So we have that. But again, this idea of science identity, like I mentioned, is really important. Relatable materials, like I said, using examples of particularly local folks. Like we have a lot of really amazing local researchers when talking about environment, right? Like Dr. Tyrone Hayes up at UC Berkeley, who has done all the research about frogs and the water pollution and frogs, right? And has had a lot of people try to get him to stop publishing and things like that. He's a really impressive guy. So utilizing videos from other people in class. So it's also not just me talking all the time, which I also like. And those things can help to develop personal agency, right? And that's kind of where I land on the key to this, on helping students with stress learning about climate change, is understanding the idea of agency. And this is Linda Briskin's definition of agency. She's a feminist philosopher, that the ability to act to shape one's own life. This does not in any way dismiss aspects of systemic oppression and structures that are in place to keep people from developing their agency. But a lot of what you can do here then is talk about what is under my control or my community's control and what isn't, and how do we emphasize the things that we can. So just to kind of conclude, my idea for applying all of this is kind of a three-stranded circle. And again, my dissertation chair, who's a philosopher, was like, that looks like DNA. I was like, well, that'd be really weird DNA if you have three strands, but I see it. Okay, maybe on another planet. But interweaving in things like equitable practices, which I'll talk about the difference between anti-oppressive and oppressive pedagogies in a minute. Then looking at the ways we teach science, and then my kind of focus is contemplative practice and looking at ways of teaching skills for handling stress, which we can all do, right? So when we talk about oppressive pedagogies or andragogies, those of us that teach grown-ups, right? These are things that are really separate, and I'm going to kind of move it through these two kind of quickly for a sec, right? Where you're valuing self over group, right? And where you're legitimizing power and privilege, as opposed to, bump. It's not moving forward. Well, that's a good one here. I will link to this idea of perfectionism, right? And overwork. Like, oh, if you're not exhausted, then you're not working hard enough, right? Or, oh, I have to do like that idea again of kind of how to deal with the STEM grading where you may not get as high of scores as you used to. Whereas, and I don't know why I am stuck, my slide is stuck. Let me try one more thing. There we go. Anti-oppressive pedagogies, right, talk about the experiences of the othered. And in my classes, we do talk a bit about the history of science in particular and the role, Carolyn Merchant's amazing book, Death of Nature, right, looking at how scientific revolution kind of ended up, oh, things that are natural are bad and need to be controlled, right? And when we start the conversation that way, you can see kind of ears in the room perk up like, wait, what are we talking about now? And I would say this generation coming into college, they have less ideas of boundaries of education, right? Everything is interdisciplinary. Like that doesn't make sense to them because they think it all should be interdisciplinary, which I kind of can't disagree with. Right? So talking about things in terms of how can we again kind of privilege our own agency as opposed to other people's privilege. But similarly in science, looking at how do we cover content versus just covering stuff. So there's really great research, particularly in college science. We are asking too much. When I look at what was in Campbell, right, still Campbell for majors biology, the volume of information that I had to learn back in the mid 90s is very different than the amount of stuff they're expected to know now, right? And so we've just added more on. So how can we explore then what's sometimes referred to as nature of science, like the how? There's really great research on the philosophy of science, or like this was an example from the New York Times on how science really works that came out during COVID, right? Like we'd like to think it's this ordered thing, but we all in science know it doesn't always happen that way. So being kind of open to these ideas of science being more exploration. And then this idea of what's referred to sometimes as equity mindful. So not just equity minded, but equity mindful. And that can be a challenge when it's a long day in the class and you're tired and whatever, but trying to respond versus react on my side, but also teaching folks the importance of pausing. I have noticed in my classes, even if we're going to take 5 minutes, how quickly this action happens. Right. And people just pull their phones right out. It's like, could y'all just put your phones down for like can you not have your phone out all the time? And the answer is no. I know it's really challenging. I find myself doing, I was at Kaiser earlier, it was like everyone in the room on their phone, right? So importance of stopping and listening or nothing, doing nothing, which is where the idea of contemplative practice comes in. Right. So the idea of exploring things, and in biology, we can do great kind of discussions of things like forest bathing and the importance of trees and being out in nature, right? And looking at traditions, we talk a lot about meditation and the research, the science of meditation, but then also like, why did we have to do science to show that it worked when people have known it's worked for thousands and thousands of years? So those kinds of places are places where we can explore how to manage our stress without stress managing us, right? How to not just get through school to get where you want, but actually enjoy it. That part can be hard when you already don't necessarily feel super welcome, right? So for now, right, my ideas here, again, like just to kind of focus on the top three, would be increasing communication. And that's one thing I will say when I first kind of was started to look into how to do this research. I was like, oh, I'm not sure how I should do this. And one of my instructors was like, why don't you just ask? Oh yeah, I can't just ask, but also changing stuff like the scientist in me was like, well, I can't change the survey halfway through because then it's not relatable. But what I really wanted were answers. So how to do those kinds and how to be okay with it not being perfect on my own side as well. Also, the community building part. One of the questions I asked students would they be comfortable talking about how they manage stress in the group, right, in class, and particularly if it had spiritual or religious kind of connotations. And I was really surprised that many individuals said, yeah, they'd be happy to talk about it even in a science class. Because I'll say, again, in the early 90s, when I was in college and grad school, that nobody would have talked religion in a science class, all right? Even talk to you about yoga or meditating or anything like that. And then being creative, right? So exploring what students are feeling like, are comfortable sharing or doing. Like maybe you have a really creative class one semester or 1 year, and maybe utilizing those kinds of skills more than just writing standard lab reports or writing reports on things, but asking. This is kind of back to the beginning of communicating and asking. And I'll say for myself, this has changed a lot of the ways that I teach biology at Laney and within our department. It's changed some stuff, which has been really great. A lot of it, though, don't want to try to change too much at once. So, and make sure they still have the foundational skills to transfer. But it has been a really great exploration into these areas. So I do have a QR code that hopefully works for my bibliography if you want. I can also talk about the specifics a bit more if need be, and I am totally happy to answer any questions. And I think I did a pretty good job on time.
You were amazing. You were amazing,
Thank you.
Amy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
thank you so much. I think it really hones in on what a complex art and experience and enterprise it is to be a teacher. And just, thank you so much for all of that. Do we have some questions that we would like to ask Amy from our group or anybody? We're a small group and you can raise your hand and unmute yourself if you have a question.
Definitely. Yeah, and I just looked at the chat and yeah. And the answer, yes, we have a lot. We have a lot to kind of consider and there's so many options, and sometimes we get pressure to like get through material and you don't feel like you have the room to modify anything, right? Especially, now. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you not scare folks? That's a really, really great question. I will say what's kind of fascinating too, in talking generationally, right? So I am a Gen Xer. I was born in 1973. Grew up with, the importance of not littering, especially here in California and stuff, right? Environmental movement. And it is mildly frustrating. Like this is where we're still, we're still here. Whereas the Gen Z kind of kids coming in that um, they don't have the same fear about this. And partially, some of them were telling me, and some of this is anecdotal in class, they have been learning about climate change their entire education. So it's not a surprise. It's nothing new. It's just reality. And that I was like, I know, but it's upsetting. And they're like, yeah, but a lot of things are upsetting to that, right? So how do you prioritize which? So I think talking about just the science of it has been a way that many people have tried to not make it upsetting. But instead, I think talking about it being scary or it being levels of stress actually helps students feel like they can talk to you about if they're scared about it or not scared about it. Right. It's really challenging, particularly now. One student said like, yeah, it is scary, but I'm more afraid of going to work and having ICE come and take me away. So you're like, okay, true, right? Yes, yeah. And that's a reality that a lot of folks are worried all the time about that kind of thing, or even family and things. Yeah, it is hard to motivate, right? And partially, some of what they had said, a lot of them have said, complaining about my generation for sure, is like, yeah, and you're all expecting us to fix this. And that's just not fair. And it's not fair, right? That isn't fair. And so how to address the things that we can do, right? Like, okay, so we might not, there is that, and that's where that personal agency versus collective agency kind of comes in, because we can write letters, we can protest, we can do things as a community. We can also go to Lake Merritt and participate in lake cleanup days, right, or coastal cleanup days. We can use less plastic ourselves, which can be really hard, right? We can get to know our neighbors. Ezra Klein wrote a book called Why We're Polarized, and his last chapter he put like, this is where I'm supposed to suggest stuff, but I don't really know what we're supposed to do. But I will ask you, how many national politicians can you name, and how many members of your own city council can you name? I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good question. And I've lived in Oakland for 25 years. I should know. I know who the mayor is, or like, I don't know. So how can we, like, as small communities, maybe make changes that will help support us through this, right? Like, we might not be able to stop climate change, but can we get to know our neighbors better and help support, like, the older person down the street, or the person, the single parent? Like, are there ways that we can build communities, our own communities, to support each other through what's going to be difficult? And that's a big ask in a lot of ways, but it's also, I think, something that individuals can do, and be, and feel like we're doing something. Yeah, right. Yeah, like, it's really hard when we think local politics, right? Right. Because the TV, though, is national, so it makes us kind of focus. But those kinds, or are there ways we could start like community gardening, or like exploring Lake Merritt, or I don't know how many. I live kind of close to the Mountain View Cemetery. If you've come to see the bald eagles, they're so impressive, right? Like, things like that. Using iNaturalist just to see kind of what we have around here, or exploring the shoreline stuff. I think those are things we should enjoy it, not just like, oh, we should enjoy it because it might go away, but we should participate or commune with nature, if that's something that is language that resonates with you. Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah. I'm just looking at,
Yes.
yeah, participatory science, right? Participate in BioBlitz days, and or even going, the Oakland Museum has that amazing natural history wing, and those things, like, they do a lot of community events to help, like, like Friday right now, right? They've got food trucks through October. How can we support our local kind of ecosystem?
So one of the important messages that come out of organizations like iNaturalist, and something that we use a lot in Rotary Nature Center Friends, is the importance of individual observation that can actually expand on and provide critical information that scientists cannot gather as individually. So
Huh.
I feel like it's important to let young people know that their observations are important and can contribute to even to a better understanding, which is probably the best possible goal, because learning and accumulating scientific knowledge takes a very long time, and it needs to be verified and tried over and over again, and so forth. And so contributing to that body of knowledge going forward is a very important thing that young people can do, and community members in general can do. The other
Yeah.
thing I did want to say about that is that studies have been done at UC Berkeley and other universities, showing that students who are probably not the group of people that you might expect to be successful do become more successful when they have the opportunity to work with real science and to be
Yeah.
participatory with, with people who look like them, but also with people who don't look like them. If they have a genuine role in
dry clothes in the
participating.
bag and bring them back up, right? Oh, no.
Hey, David,
Yeah.
did you? Hey, David.
I'm sorry.
No,
That's
no
okay.
worries. So I
Yes.
just wanted to say that there are many organizations out here that are doing that in addition to what's named, and we'll send out a list to people here that you might want to consider, connecting with.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say a lot of the participants who I talk to who are done with their undergraduate and in graduate schools or professional programs, a lot of them participated in undergraduate research. And that was really key to them feeling like, and that's that, like, not just seeing science, but being a science, like that science identity of really feeling like you are a scientist, right? So it doesn't have to fit a particular mold of what that looks like. Yeah. And there's so many opportunities around here for volunteering and stuff like that, I think is really great.
I don't want to cut off any further conversation. We're getting close to our time where we usually end, and I haven't paused to give my final credits and thank yous. Would it be okay if we pause at this
Sure.
moment?
Mhm.
And I just like to share a few closing slides, and then depending on people's stamina, we could go forward. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And hope to see you in September. We want to give special thanks to Dr. Bohorquez, to New Voices Are Rising externs and fellows, Team Oakland, Lake Merritt Institute, Lake Merritt Boating Center, Save the Bay, and all of Oakland. Let's see, where are we here? Yes. Lakeside chats are recorded and rebroadcast by the City of Oakland KTOP TV. We have a rebroadcast of older programs. We are now up to 56 older programs. They are rebroadcast on Sundays from 6 to 7 p.m. And then in the last 2 Sundays of a month, we have the current recorded Lakeside chat. Want to remind everybody that we are very excited about our Cal Naturalist course that we're developing, and hopefully many of you will consider it. And get back to me or Stephen with questions about how you can become involved. Lakeside Chats are brought to you by Rotary Nature Center Friends. This is our 57th. Coming up on September 5th, we have a Lakeside Chat with retired Laney College geography professor emeritus Mark Razan, who just came back from Alaska. I just talked to him today with new information about Russia, United States climate change chaos, and its effect on native communities and Bering Sea ecology. This should be fascinating. We are going to be celebrating Biodiversity Day, September 6th through 14th. With BioBlitz activities at the lake, and also stewarding our marsh that we're working with right off the parking lot of the boating center. Creek to Bay Day is coming up on September 20th. I hope you all can come out for Creek to Bay Day. We will continue our morning Adopt a Spot events with marsh, water testing, and plankton. So dates will be announced on our Facebook. If you enjoy what we do, please consider giving a tax-deductible donation to Rotary Nature Center Friends. There's a donation button on our website, and you can also send a check to Rotary Nature Center Friends at the address that is here. It's also on our website and on our link tree. We want to thank our producer, Rob Lamone, for helping us with all of the production angles. And we want to thank Katie, myself, and David, co-chairs, for organizing all these diverse activities. Kirsten Furman provides art and design support. Betsy Schultz, Janai Southworth, Rebecca Abrams, Miriam Saad, Rohan Tyagi, Leander McNeely, Richard Hasagawa, and many other Rotary Nature Center Friends volunteers who keep our program going. We want to thank them all. And again, looking forward to seeing you soon. I think another source of stress that I've noticed, not just, but probably, um, in vulnerable students, but in people in general, is fear of being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And not understanding that science really progresses by people being wrong, and it's not by proving things, it's by disproving things. And so every repeatable observation is contributing.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
All data are good data, right?
well, all
So,
hypotheses are good hypotheses too. But
yep,
so it's not
exactly.
like you
And
have a
that,
wrong hypothesis and you were stupid, but
right,
you
right.
you have a hypothesis and oh, it wasn't supported by the evidence. We have gained knowledge. That's, I
Mm-hmm.
think, a really important idea for people
That's
to get.
exactly what happened. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and that's that nature of science educational modeling. And that's kind of what the focus is on there. It kind of goes along with the Thomas Kuhn kind of um, scientific revolutions kind of, or Bruno Latour kind of thing, that like science is often advertised as being this very straightforward, blah, 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 but it's usually errors that give you more information than not, so it's all right. And in fact, it should be encouraged, right? Like
No hypothesis.
explored.
That's how we move forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I believe Darwin was an originator of that idea.
Well,
Um,
I like to say that I'm really thankful that you and others are doing this work and looking at the impact of stress on students given the modern climate change and other conditions that we're dealing with. Like yourself, earlier today, thinking of the upcoming talk, I tried to reflect and remember whether or not and how it was that stress showed up for me,
Mm,
what kind of support or conversation or information that I received. And I couldn't remember much at all. Probably more than some maybe unconscious beer drinking. Um, there wasn't this type of conversation that I've not only heard tonight, but also have been involved with myself, I guess, the last few years. Um, and then with that said, it goes right to the heart of the work that Katie and I have been doing at Lake Merritt in terms of water quality testing and species identification and microorganism study. When encountering students, well, it's twofold, and you actually mentioned the second fold later on in your talk, but it's twofold in the sense that on the one hand, you've got this lack of interest based upon a disaffection um, for many reasons. And then that can be compounded by stress and stress levels. And we have a variety of students that we're serving each year with a plethora of income levels and ethnic backgrounds going on. So, having said that, I have noticed that some students arrive, and I can almost, in a few instances, see the amount of stress that they're carrying as I attempt to engage them. And,
yeah.
and I felt at a loss as an instructor. So this type of exploration that you shared tonight is helpful, and I want to applaud that. But if you can, yeah, say anything more to, um, yes, how you just deal with that in the moment.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a really great question. Yeah, and one of the things that's fascinating is you know FERPA is an important privacy protection for students in college, like in particular, right? So I can't necessarily go and ask, right? Like, what's going on? I mean, I can ask, they don't have to answer. And sometimes if I ask, students are going to answer because of the power dynamic that kind of presents. So we do a lot of kind of peer group stuff so that, and then not like people have to report to me, but doing check-ins with people about what's going on in their body where they don't have to share, right? Like I think there was this part in because there's a lot of research looking at contemplative practice in K through 12 in particular. And there was this thing about like sharing for a while, like everybody's got to share. Like, no, everybody doesn't have to share. Like, no, like you can check in with yourself and you can write it down or you can not write it down. Like, it's there's a privacy aspect to that, that it's good to check in, and then it's also good to give people something to do with that check, because that's the other part, right? Like, I mentioned the ACEs test before, and it was a challenge for me to take. I don't mind to admit, I would say. But when I told students about it, I had two students in particular come to me after and were like, Amy, that was kind of a challenge to go through those questions. And some of them were like, kind of, and I realized that's just yes, like about being living in places you didn't necessarily feel safe and stuff like that. And we had talked about doing that as a way of like, what are ACEs scores of our students? Is there a way to monitor without monitoring, right? Is there a way to get more information that would help us that's not too intrusive? And we go back and forth on that one. But when I see people who I can tell have a lot of stress or carrying a lot, uh, being compassionate, being friendly in a way that's non-intrusive, I think can really kind of help to make sure folks feel welcome without calling out their stress, right? Like without like, that one changes by the person of like, hey, how's it going? And just kind of always kind of checking in without checking on. If I feel like I'm using lots of jargon at the moment, right? Right. But I think you know what I mean. Like,
Yes.
um, like giving people the space to come to you. Um, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, there's definitely semesters where I think, all right, I did a good job with about 80% of the people in the room. And I don't know about the rest. But knowing sometimes you don't know the impact that you had until someone tells you, a couple of years later that you did, right? Um, and it's the difference between trying to like help people develop skills to, like I said, and manage is a challenging word to use, but uh, knowing that they have a space where they're safe for the time, I think is important. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question though, David. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's
That was a very thorough answer to the question that I gained a lot from, and I hope everyone else did as well. And I could even explore it more with you. However, it raises a bit of a particular that I'd rather explore in the moment and hear your ideas about. And that is that when you first mentioned the ACEs program during your talk, I remember having a visceral body reaction that was negative.
uh-huh.
It came up in the form of the it had to do with the humanness of what we're talking about here and the dynamic of how it shows up in the lives of human beings and young people versus a study
Yeah.
and a tool and a educational formula or program or, that you're required to meet in order to meet some kind of performance goals. And so when I heard the term ACEs uh, uh, rules, so I had a reaction, a negative reaction to that in terms of how can we actually achieve real connection when we're going to still, whatever we discover, we're still going to try to quantify it in the terms of where we're coming from and how we understand things as in the form of a study and a program.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, yeah. And I think especially working in public education, right? Yeah. We always have rubrics and standards and things, right? Right. And sometimes those work and sometimes they don't. My favorite are the ones that change and they're like, no, we got to do this. And then 5 years later, oh no, that was wrong. We got to do that. Like, all right. And that's where I think that like nature of science educational model kind of the idea of covering material, teaching content, like I can teach people all the scientific names of all the mollusks. They're not going to remember that. Right. I could teach them about the cool mollusks we have in Lake Merritt. Maybe they will, right? Maybe they will. And I think the same thing happens with things like looking at adverse childhood experiences. So that research actually started with a weight loss study down in San Diego, where they were trying to figure out why people went through a weight loss study and some people kept off the weight and some people didn't. And one of them said, well, I was molested as a child. And then they were like, is this the thing? Is this more important than maybe we should ask? Like maybe we should ask these, which are very obviously personal questions. And then they started to see these correlations. But yeah, and acronyms, I know, like, and higher education's full of acronyms too. So
Well,
how we can explore with the flexibility of different groups of people, I think is important, right? So when I do these talks and different groups of faculty, they're like, no, I just want, what's something I can plug into my class? Like, that's not
But,
really the question, right? Right.
well, but also, a classroom of students, they're all different. They
Mm-hmm.
learn differently. Uh, and you have to be able to recognize that, or you're going to lose half of them if you teach a rigid way. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a book written by a woman named Jo Bowler called Mathish.
Mm.
And she actually did some interesting uh, experiments in parties to see how people learned math and how when those who were successful, what was the way they learned it? Because she felt that in STEM, you were losing brilliant students because they struggled on learning, say, math,
Mm-hmm.
because they were only taught math a certain way and they didn't comprehend that.
Yeah.
And, so I think there's a ton of stress out in that field for a lot of different reasons. And you talked about a lot of them tonight. It was really provoking, mind provoking, to hear all of it.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the good teachers, and you mentioned them coming back to you, or probably is an indication that they recognized that they reached these people by doing things differently, and they were able to learn before they dropped out of the whole, area of STEM or math. And so,
Yeah.
that's what my takeaway. But there was one other question I had regarding climate change and students.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of students, when you encounter them, are deniers of
Mm.
climate change for whatever reason, whether it's their parents and the politics and whatnot? And how do they, if they do change, is it because you teach them science and what science represents? Uh, and I'm just curious as to
Yeah.
your encounter of that, because there are some that are going to be just total deniers, just like there is in our society, for no other reason than they're idiotic for the
Yeah.
most part,
Well, and
and they have no science to base what they say is happening, but they're going to say it.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And there's been really great, I'll answer specifically for Laney, but also there's really good research with that, saying that nature of science education, looking at socially debated versus scientifically accepted topics, right?
yeah,
Whether it's climate change or evolution or
yeah,
vaccines, right? Like,
yeah,
so, right, looking at those things. And one of the things that was interesting with the majority of the research has shown that if you allow people the space to explore it and connect on their own, they are more likely to be able to explain it and remember it. And, if you want to use the word buy-in, like buy into it. So, and I will say, like I said, when I was in school and even when I started teaching, I was, this is science, like religion's over here and creation myths are over here, like we're going to talk about the science of evolution, um, as opposed to like, how does it fit in with your own worldview? And what's interesting, I'll say, and the reason this relates is we do, in both of the majors and non-majors biology I teach at Laney, we talk about the IPCC, right? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the statistics looking at what climate change means, right? And then we look at things like the differences in the number of hurricanes or the strength of hurricanes, or the research done at UC Berkeley looking at migratory birds and redlining, right? Like the difference in the way birds move and the implications of redlining on migratory birds, right? We look at those things, and a lot of the folks that are climate change deniers, when we talk about the specifics that we are living in, that's, and that science and kind of what the discussion is, and debate's probably a better word, but trying to leave it open for folks to kind of express themselves. It really is that it's not that they don't, the ones I've met, right? Either they're changing their mind while they're talking, which could be, right? It's not that they're deniers as much as the, and not, usually the denying's the cause, right? Like that it's just a human caused thing. It's the not, it'll shift then, and like, oh, well, then it's not just capitalism's fault, or it's not just like the okay, maybe it's people, but it's not just industrialization. Like, okay, maybe, and you can kind of see over the semester the perspective kind of change, and then they're less anti-climate change, discussion by the end is what.
Well, but a lot of them tend to fall into it's the 100-year cycle, but they can't explain the 100-year cycle. And when
No.
the last 100, when it happened similarly 100 years ago. But
Yeah.
that's what they live by. They live by this false narrative that it's the 100-year cycle that we're experiencing and nothing else. And
Yeah.
they deny their science and how it's really changed not within that, that psych thing. So
Totally.
I
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
curious as to how you encounter it, how you maybe deal with it, because, everybody comes, growing up, they're exposed to beliefs and whatever, and they then go into, college or school, and they have to, deal with it with everybody else in the classroom. But
Yeah.
it was
And I
great,
think,
great talk tonight. I
oh, thank
really
you. Yeah.
uh,
And
found
I
it
will say
very
it's,
interesting.
yeah, it kind of the same with the evolution thing,
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
so I kind
I
of
try to
handle it
stay
the same
clear of
way.
that one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And we kind of talk about like what the consequence would be to believe these, like if what is the consequence of believing in that versus the 100 year cycle? Like what is the
well,
consequence?
I
Like what
mean,
do
you
you
could
think?
even broaden it to health
Hmm.
care, and
Yeah.
the whole issue of vaccinations,
Oh, yeah. Yes, that came
denying,
up.
that they work or don't work, and I mean, it
Yeah.
just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's always a lot of science out there to prove probably what's the main thing that's happening, and I
Well,
don't know,
Amy,
just
your talk tonight spoke really, your responses to the questions spoke volumes to the issues raised, and were really fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a,
Yeah.
I have an anecdotal
Mm.
piece I can share. And this past summer, uh, during the course of the summer, Katie and I led several field trips from the port of Oakland on the San Francisco ferry across the bay to Fisherman's Wharf and along the wharf to the San Francisco Exploratorium. During the course of the trips, we engaged and endeavored to speak with the students about the ecosystem of the bay and watershed and trash and litter reduction and storm drain systems and the local history and the importance of the gold rush, etc., and the impact of that on local people and the environment. So having said that, we did 6 trips this summer, as we do every summer. And on one of the trips in particular, I noticed that we had 30 students. And after what I felt like was talking myself blue in the face about some of those issues and topics, they were sitting on the ferry boat as we crossed the bay, and then 2 hours later, as we reversed and crossed the bay again, and all 30 of them, I looked around at one point and counted, were looking at their cell phones like this. And it occurred to me that there were people in the world who would pay and do pay thousands upon thousands of dollars to get an opportunity to traverse that bay and to see the views and the vistas that were available. And so I was really struck. But you said something in your talk this evening that you never know. It was a low moment in my day that day when I noticed that, but you never know what impact you're having. And this goes back to my own earlier question about formalizing things and standardizing and meeting those type of goals and objectives when there's an actual interplay and an experience that's occurring. Because no matter what my goal and objective was, I didn't mention that the majority of those students, it was their first time on a ferry boat, first time on the bay. It was their first time traveling to San Francisco or walking around, and however much they heard about watersheds and microorganisms and plankton, they heard it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's so. Anyway, you included that in your talk towards the end when you talked about, the hope, I guess, if you will, of it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
When I just noticed in the chat, there were 2 of my former students who are in here tonight, which is very cool, right? So I appreciate, yeah. Well, and what I'll say too, like I said, it's interesting looking at stress and learning and phones in particular, because a lot of students, like, so there's higher number of students who identifies with having ADHD or ADD, and sometimes the phone is like a security blanket, and sometimes it's the world's very overwhelming and they can focus on it. And it would be great if people could put down their phones and look at the beauty of the bay. Absolutely. And sometimes that's hard for people. And I think those of us who are really excited about this stuff, like, we want everyone to be as excited as we are, but we may still be having a positive impact even if their phone was out. Like, they might be listening more than when we know. And like this, like I said, this generation coming into college now, they have a very different perspective on all this stuff. And instead of hoping they conform to what I would like, I'm trying to be more open into what their life, experiences are going to be, which is hard because I would prefer they at least make eye contact with me when I'm talking, right? Doesn't always
Well,
work. Right?
given our perspective, we would, Katie, just one,
Sure.
our mindset would be mine. That in order to address the stress that we're encountering due to our awareness of climate change, etc., would be to maybe meditate, take a walk in nature, physical exercise, eating a little healthier, and so that's what I'm bringing.
Yeah.
And yet, for them, this what appears to me, this loss, this total absorption with the cell phone represents the same kind of stress management is the point that I hear you making at some levels. So again,
And
appreciate it.
Yeah, like I'll
I'm
say
with
I
Bob.
have had just what like mental health services comes to my class every semester. As soon as we all were coming back in person, they always ask, what do people do for their own self-care? That was the first time they didn't have to explain what that meant. And everybody had something they did for self-care, which I was like, you all know what that means? Or like, what? Like, and they were all like, yeah, it's on TikTok. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, okay, well, all right then.
Yeah, I would just like to say, as a teacher with a close to 30-year career, who hasn't changed her hairdo really since that time, that as I walk around the lake, people who I don't even recognize come up to me and remember me. And that's not always my best students, in terms of the ones who would go on to UC Berkeley at that time was the big goal. It wasn't. And you realize that sharing the moment and of learning with people is an important part of their lives. Also, I think that I know people are studying this, the role that cell phones play in serving a need that people have for human interaction, for a human group, whether it be one that they connect with through their cell phone and for their little group that they're with, or people, physical people. We are a social, we have evolved to be social, and that you're, and to be, my Darwinian self must say that fitness has always depended on, you know, who you're interacting with, what they're able to do for you. That kind of really can be relatable to politics in terms of the importance of local politicians influencing the political beliefs and voting patterns of local people, because they're also powerful in their communities. So this is a very deep and nuanced situation here, besides just satisfying, personal anxiety. That basically, I mean, we're in a free-for-all world here, where people are capitalizing on this need that people have through their phones and through advertising and through all of this stuff. And, it's just when we make a little connection that can endure for many years, it's really kind of heartening. And I think that will be important in being able to work together in some ways to address some of these big, slow developing issues like climate change, like loss of biodiversity, like, that our cell phones and our little local cliques that we are in kind of mask from us, but they're going to affect us. And so I think that's an important dimension of the um, the cell phone addiction, and the tendency of people to focus on their same age group, especially the young people that David and I work with. And that we share an experience together, I think is intergenerationally is really important.
Katie, you raised really good points in all of that, and it's very important. On the lighter side, I just wanted to say between Katie Noonan, myself, and Betsy Schultz, and Amy, and Steve Cochran, with a little help from Joya and Gene Taylor, and Mike White, and Tracy Winnow, and James Kang, we're going to get it done. And Anthony.
So, okay. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you. Yeah.
Beginning of a wonderful contemplation and interaction, and hopefully collaborations in the future amongst all of us.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think so as well. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks. And I don't mind sticking around if other people have questions or whatever. Right. Yes.
Yeah, I've been, following and managing and all this sort of stuff, but, it's the original question was, climate change and discomfort, and what is it what do you find is it about climate change that people find upsetting? Is it
Yeah.
what
So
is it? Not only people most likely affected, but just in general among your students?
Yeah, well, that the concept, the Albrecht concept of solastalgia, I think, is very well researched at this point, particularly in places like, most of the climate change mental health research has been done in Canada and Australia, right? That's been published, I will say. And I think that's true for a lot of students around here. This looking at what they won't have because of climate change, like what will be not available anymore because of climate change, and whether that's access to areas or different food, or just like the amount of stress about like air pollution and things. But like I said, I think like my talking to people my age and millennials, particularly like the older millennials, were when I talking to them about climate change, they are way more stressed out about it than the Gen Z. And I think that there's a bit of acceptance that this is just reality with Gen Z folks. I don't think it's I've heard other people like, oh, they just don't care about stuff. Like, I don't think that's right. I don't think it's that they don't care. I think the way that they express their care is different, So, um, and so, like I had one student who studied um, ice melts and glacier melting. She's was in a PhD program at Scripps, and she said, if I think it's all upsetting, and if I think about it too much, I'll quit, right? So, because she's like, I don't, it's really depressing. It is really depressing. There's also, like I said, a lot of folks with what we would call climate anxiety, that, the lone polar bear on the ice floe kind of thing, or the destruction of natural habitats, people who feel connections to nature in that way. Like that part's very upsetting. But I do think at Laney in particular, what I heard a lot was from the folks, particularly, like I said, the lower side of millennials and Gen Z, is if governments and corporations aren't going to do anything, what am I supposed to do? And quite honestly, a lot of it was like, and I see all these people telling me I should care about the environment, who live in big houses and drive fancy cars and buy stuff from Amazon every week, and like they're participating in the thing that's making it worse, and then expecting me to fix it. And that's not fair. Right? So yeah, there was a lot
I
of
think
that.
people are also missing the boat on climate change, and they're dealing with anxiety towards this issue, and it's immigration. On a world level, a lot of the world immigration that is occurring in other, Europe and elsewhere, is based on the climate change that's happening in Africa, in South, other parts
South
of
of here,
South
right?
America.
Yeah, we
And
have a lot of
people don't
international
realize it.
students.
That's causing the anxiety of our immigration in many instances, not just
Yeah,
people wanting better lives, but to get away from, they can't raise their own food.
So
right.
to
Droughts.
some extent, anxiety is localized
Yeah.
in individuals.
So it's really, that has to be broadened, and people have to know that it's not just, what's happening in our own backyard. It's happening throughout the world. And
Yeah. And I'll say, like, that's why I think Susan Clayton's kind of separating out those categories. And we have a lot of international students who are international students because they came here because of climate change. Like someone put climate refugees, right? Like there's a lot of people in Oakland who live here because they can't live where they used to live, So,
right.
yeah, and that's why when we as educators talk about climate change, it's important that we acknowledge that there will be people in the room, with these different relationships to climate change, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, before Anthony mentioned climate change and its impact on Africa and migration, that was when I heard him say that, that was eye-opening for me, because prior to that, I had been listening to you, Amy, and thinking to myself, well, my goodness, I've been thinking to myself that, oh my, to have to think about climate change and corporate irresponsibility or non-responsibility, et cetera, is so overwhelming. It's depressing. And you mean to tell me I got to think about all that on top of slavery and
Yeah.
the history uh, of discrimination here in this country following slavery?
Hmm.
Man, that's too much. Oh no, I'm going to throw my towel up and
Right. Never mind then. Right. Yeah. Right. It
Now
is.
David's stressed out.
Well, and I think that's, yeah, a lot of students that in classes where that, you know, in that research on climate change education and looking at, you know, the impact of just telling students like there's a doomsday clock, like that it hasn't worked. Like that doesn't help actually. It actually just makes people feel like they can't do anything. But looking at things like um, increases in community gardening in communities that don't no longer have access to food. And you know, Oakland Farm City is a great book looking at Oakland kind of, you know, and I don't like the word guerrilla farming, but quote unquote guerrilla farming, like, um, and looking at the organizations we have here in Oakland that even do soil testing for people and things like that, as a focus on rebuilding communities in a way that's outside of some of these oppressive systems is something that students at Laney and at least appreciate, you know, and I do. Like I would prefer to talk about it like, okay, so here's that collective versus personal agency thing, you know. Because yeah, they have a good point. Like I said, I grew up in the 70s where it was a huge environmental concern was big, and I grew up with environmentally conscious parents, and I'm a biologist. And you know, I'm 51 now, and I don't know, I can't tell you what we've done. You know what I mean? So maybe that model doesn't work. So listening to what students are saying would help them versus me prescribing what will help them, I think is really important now. Yeah.
oh boy, you had me until you got to the whole. I was rolling right with you until you got to the part about listening to the students.
Right. Yeah. And they're gonna go, I don't know. And you're like, all right, I'll ask you again next week. We'll see.
Well, no, I have to get over my thinking, well, what could they possibly know?
Right. Well, that
Um,
too.
yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Hmm. But I know best. Yeah, yeah. I will say too, Anthony, one thing I was going to mention about when you're talking about math, there's when looking at that leaky pipeline research, a lot of students who are like more going towards STEM, like biology, chemistry, physics, particularly students of color, particularly African American students, particularly African American male students, drop and go to psych because you don't have to take chemistry. And I've talked to a number of my students who are taking biology with me, and then they go to take chem, and it's the way it's taught, you know. And I like, and I've talked to our chem folks, our math folks. I will say at Laney, they're doing this progressive grading thing, which is really cool. So if you don't get it right on one test, you get a second opportunity to show you've learned it. Which I'm like, can I go back and take math that way? But it's a you know, and that's great. It's great. Psych's wonderful. Like, no offense to psych. It's just like, oh, but they found that if people actually take biology before chem, they're more likely to stay biology majors.
Yeah. Yeah. There's different ways again that
Mhm.
we should blame Sesame Street. They
Yeah.
screwed up everybody by their whole process was very short learning.
Hmm.
And so kids got into school and they couldn't sit there long enough because a subject matter could extend beyond that time frame that they
Yeah.
had
Well,
learned something on Sesame Street.
it's happening again though. I will tell you right now, during COVID, that's what they kept telling us, you can't make videos more than 15 minutes, and that was too long. And it's
That
Like I'm a Sesame Street kid and but this TikTok thing,
Oh,
5 minutes.
yeah, I don't do any
can't
social media,
explain.
so.
No, but that's what we're being told, like
Oh, I know.
educators now. Oh no,
Yeah,
if you're gonna do online lecture, it can't,
yeah.
5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, no, I can't explain photosynthesis in 5 minutes. That doesn't work.
No, you can't, but that's
No, but I
your,
can do a overview in 5 minutes and then do expanding. And that's, I mean, I think that's it too. We're all gonna have to change.
yeah, it is. You have to change to
Yeah.
do it, I guess, but it's just, you look back at our mistakes and how we did, things were done and now how they're affecting,
Yeah. Yeah.
the future, of learning to some degree. But we should always be progressing to new ideas and new ways to teach because the world just changes so drastically. And people are exposed to things differently that you have to be able to be accommodating to all of that.
Well, Amy, I'm surprised that you were hearing 15 minutes and 5
Uh-huh.
minutes. When I was in Berkeley studying filmmaking, I was hearing 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, three
And so
minutes.
that was really challenging for me again. In fact, it was hard for me not to disconnect when you guys were challenging Sesame Street because
Yeah, but
that's where my
it's
mind and the
it's
way that I think
interesting.
about the world was
Yeah.
developed.
I learned a lot from Electric Company too.
Yes, absolutely. Um,
I wrote policy for most of my career, and the same thing happened there in writing for people. You had to write to different target groups, and sometimes you downed it to, next to nothing, no big word in it, and, pretty short. And, then there were other groups that obviously you can elaborate on what you can say, but
Yeah.
I mean, it takes an adjustment to do as well,
well, I do have the benefit, though, of being able to reflect upon my understanding of the learning experience of my great grandparents, who I knew, versus mine, which was,
Yeah.
on a par with what's happening with people getting information in 3 minute sound bites for me today. And so it was at least enough to give me a chance for reflection.
Yeah. Agreed. I know that's one thing my students, I have them read the summary of land use from the IPCC and they're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I know, see, this is why it doesn't get very far.
Yeah.
It's such a dense report. Who can read it and get anything out of it? Yeah. So let's learn how to write where people can understand us. Right. Yeah. So it's hard.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
let's learn how to communicate in a way that somehow the way that we communicate triggers neurons in the other person that reduces anxiety.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Relaxed conversations. Yes. Those are great.
Yeah, thank you so much,
So
Amy.
so David, that's why my wife tells me to be quiet, so I don't stress her out.
Anthony, that's one great way to learn. Get married.
53 years.
Wow, congratulations. Amazing. Well, it's just such a deep conversation. I really appreciate everybody here tonight. David and I are in the thick of it almost every day.
Yeah, God bless you.
And so is Amy, though. So is Amy.
And so is Amy, absolutely, of course. And Betsy, she's
Betsy's not far from it. She's all over it.
I think she's all over it.
And
Yeah.
Stephen.
Yeah. So we're all doing our part, and hopefully we have some good ideas to think about in terms of getting interacting and engaging both ourselves and our students towards a more productive understanding.
Yeah.
Well, it's clear to me that some of our students are getting these things in
Mhm.
ways that I could never imagine. And,
Mm-hmm.
no telling what they'll do with it in terms of responding to some of the issues and topics that we brought up tonight.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I see that, you teaching and being exposed to younger people probably give you better hope for the future from
Some
them
days.
than from dealing with adults who,
That's-
by 40, 50, 60, their minds are set, and it's a bigger struggle, I think, sometimes to change them.
yeah.
Like Katie I think mentioned that it's a slow process, or in that sense, but I
Very
think
slow.
youth gives you hope,
Hmm.
uh for the most part, that to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I got to go to bed. It's almost midnight here,
thank you
so
so much, Anthony.
Thanks for
Wow.
coming.
Yeah, it's been a deep discussion. And thanks everybody. Thank you especially Amy for sticking around and
Yeah. Thanks for having
talking
me.
with us. It was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
And yeah,
And
so
if you haven't come to see the bald eagles, come see that. Very cool. And
oh,
then
I
I'll see you at
know.
the lake.
Yes. We are actually hoping to incorporate a walk in that area into our California Naturalist course.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's something lovely to see. They do make it to Lake Merritt too. Yeah,
I've seen
fish.
them, right? Well, they
They
gotta
do.
be eaten somewhere. All right. So
Oh yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. All
Well,
right.
thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Amy, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
And
Thank
Okay,
really
thanks,
appreciate
Amy.